how using Notion actually was the breakthrough when it comes to content creation for me. Now, here's the problem you have, basically. It's you create something, you record something, and then you edit it. Then you kind of need some way to track it and to schedule it. And then there's the distribution. These are the three major things you have to do as someone who creates content, I guess. I didn't really solve the first problem. I recorded some things. I was in the middle and tracking, and I just used the file names as the tracking things. And then the distribution is also, you had to have an Excel, a list, but these were all things that were just not really good. So Notion, when Notion came in, what I now could do is, I basically had a single file, and this single file had a name in Notion. And then what this allowed me to do is that I can reference now the file that is on my hard drive, so basically a video file, for example, and I can reference this file in Notion. Then in Notion is basically kind of a database management software, you could say. You can actually make two types of things in there. You can make databases, which can be displayed as a table or as something else. So basically you have different views you can view the same things at. Imagine you have a photo album. Every single photo, basically, every single picture would be an item in this table. And now you can just randomly attribute certain attributes to this file. This could mean that's the date of where the picture was taken. This could mean that whether the picture is black and white. This could mean whether the picture has a person on it or no person on it. So you basically just say that this item has certain characteristics. And what this allows you to do is very many things. Because what you now can do is you have one single file, and that's the ideal scenario. There will be scenarios where you don't have a single file, but for simplicity's sake, I tried and I still try to make one single file. Also, if I record a video like this, I try to make one single file. That's this video file. When I make a podcast, I also make a video file, and I can post the video file to YouTube actually, and also use the video file to upload it to my podcast host Anchor, who takes video files and then takes the audio out of the video file and uses it just as an audio file then. Now, first of all, I had to find a system to standardize naming, the naming scheme. So a first requirement was that it had to be something that basically was unique and could never be doubled. Also, I knew from experience that I changed naming schemes every few months. So what I needed was something I couldn't change. So whenever I changed my mind about this naming scheme, it wouldn't change because it's still the same thing. Therefore, it had to be something that is not influenced by myself. So what I came up with is this. I used a timestamp. If you think about it, every single media that is created actually has a timestamp, and that's the creation timestamp. And even if you don't have the creation timestamp, you have the often within Windows Explorer, for example, you can just open the properties of a file and then see when the file was modified. Then you have the modified timestamp. Of course, this is kind of a replacement method for the creation timestamp, but if you think about it, why this even makes sense. You are one person, and this one person at one single point in time, infinitely small, usually the biggest unit is the second we take. At every single second, you can only basically create one single file. You can only create one single Excel file or take a picture, but you cannot do both at the same time. And even if you did, then there are milliseconds. Of course, the milliseconds are not displayed, but this is just to explain the concept. The concept is this, that because you are so constrained by your physical body and by your thinking, you can only do one single thing, one single file creation process at one given point of time. And because time is linear, there is no double. Every single file then now has a name. Of course, this doesn't mean that every single file you create automatically has this name. For example, with the video files, and also with pictures, more and more cameras, for example, my camera on my Galaxy S10 automatically names the files after the timestamp. The only thing I have to do is take out the underslash, because then I have a 14-digit number that is the timestamp. Of course, it's a little bit hard to read it natively, kind of, without splitting it up into the year, then the month, and so on. So When it comes to the sorting of the timestamp, it's very obvious. You just sort from the biggest number to the smallest number, which is the year, then the month, then the date, then the hours, then the minutes, and then the seconds. When it comes to seconds, it's just seconds. And it's not milliseconds, because this would be 3 numbers and then we wouldn't have 14 digits anymore. This now means for every single file you create, you have a 14-digit number. And this 14-digit number acts as the file ID, the identifier of this single file. This now means whether this is a picture, whether this is an audio recording you did once 10 years ago on your phone, whether this is a video, whether this is maybe a blog post. For blog posts, it's a little bit different because often you do not really have a file. But also if you wrote your blog post in a Word file, then you would have a timestamp again. Or if you published your blog post right after writing it, then you also would have a timestamp again. So, I mean, it's the same with saving something. If you have a book, for example, the book does not have really a timestamp because it's a process, obviously. But then you just take the timestamp of when this process is finished. This means whenever you finally save the file, or you make the final PDF, which then acts as the file. Because before this was just the creation process. Just like here, if I record this video, I just have the timestamp of when I started this video, usually. It's not the end of the video, because yeah, it's just the start. So therefore, it's not always the end process, but you have a certain timestamp. And within the time of recording me this video, of course I could have taken pictures. But here is the thing again. Because it's only one single point in time, there cannot be multiple points in time. This means when I record a video and I take pictures at the same time, or I take screenshots of this video, these will be new files because it's a new timestamp. This doesn't mean that you at any single point in time cannot have parallel recording processes going on. So I could, for example, record with 2 cameras at the same time. But even the thing is just, without automation, you cannot really start 2 processes at the same time. Even if I had 2 phones here and I pointed on my fingers on my 2 phones at the same time, I wouldn't be able to start them at the exact same point in time. Therefore, chances are it would be a little bit different. And even if you have a case where even the seconds are identical, then just change 1 second to before and 1 after. So much about the file ID. This now means every single file you ever had on your hard drives, whether this is an Excel file, whether this is a picture, whether this is a copy of a picture. For copies of pictures, you can just use another naming scheme. You have to use another naming scheme, but ideally, you would only have 1 file. When it comes to taking pictures, for me, it looks like this. If I create JPEGs, then I have the JPEG, which is then the file. Basically, I just view them as finished files. And this is how you should view all these files all together. And this is also how I store my files these days. I only store the finished files. I don't store, for example, the different parts of the video whenever my phone crashes and I have to edit them together, which is something I try to avoid, but nevertheless, sometimes it happens. Therefore, what then happens is then I just take the timestamp of the first video, the name of the first video, and the whole video just has then the timestamp. The edited video has then the timestamp of the first video, and I delete the other ones. If you now only keep the finished product, obviously this doesn't apply to all things, but this is a policy. This is a policy. And this policy, what this allows you to do is to think easier. Because now, if I want to publish this video, there are not 3 different versions. I have to remember which one was the actual one and which one was the one I cut 3 seconds out, because I only have 1 file. So if I now go and post this video to YouTube, then it's only 1 file. And it also ever will be 1 file. If I download the video from YouTube, which could happen, then I would have a copy of this file, but I don't need to store the copy if I still have the original. And if I don't have the original, then I re-download maybe a copy, and then that's the original. I just use the creation date, so basically the download date. Of course, this kind of messes up my chronology if I post all things chronological, which is something I don't do, because there is something else that is going on when it comes to scheduling, which is that you sometimes have to post things without them being chronological, because sometimes you actually want to be close to the actual point in time where you recorded the video when you also published the video, because it's something that just came out, for example. If you make a tech review and this thing came out 3 days ago, then it makes sense to publish this thing maybe after you finished it. So this means, in even more detail, we have the recording process. And the recording process ends in the creation of a single file, ideally. The single file then has a file ID. And here is now where Notion comes into play. Because you can now take the single file ID and now create multiple characteristics for this file, you can basically then also sort and filter this database with all these criteria you apply. And for every single scenario where you only want to sort, where you only want to have a certain output of the database, you can, let's just assume we have this picture folder again. It's a picture folder, basically all the pictures you ever took. And now every single picture has an ID. The ID is just the creation date. And the creation date now has different components. So you could say that in Notion, you have a function that spits out, that just takes the year out of the creation date. And then you would have the creation date. So if we, for example, now say that you want to filter all these pictures by the year 2000, and you only want to have the output pictures taken in the year 2000, obviously this is also already happening in Explorer, for example. I mean, you can filter things by year and by date and by creation time. But now the thing is that these things are fixed. Of course, you can select them. There is a pre-selection on Windows Explorer available for files. But what now is the distinction Notion has. So the distinctive feature Notion has is that you can randomly attribute things to a certain file. For me, this means I can have an attribute what the state of a piece of content is. For example, if I record this video, then the current state, so I have a recording state, and this could mean that it either is to record, it already is recorded, or something else. There is a third type, but that's pretty much the only two distinctions I have in there. You can also say if something is a short form content or a long form content. When it comes to video, is it below 1 minute or is it above 1 minute? The first one would be short content, and the later one would be not more, but long form content. You can apply this short and long for many different content pieces. For example, I view blog. So there is a short form blog, which is Instagram and Facebook, where you basically post short form things, and then there is a long form blog, which is basically a normal blog. It's the same with video. There's short form, I just mentioned it. It's the same with audio. There is, as of right now, not really a short form platform for audio clips, but there is a long form. That's called podcast or audiobook. So basically a long form audio. And when it comes to now scheduling all of these things, it also becomes very, very easy because you have all of these pieces and you can just randomly put in a number. And then you can sort the whole thing by number, which could mean that you have 3 pictures and you just want to post the second picture first. So then you just add basically another attribute, another property. This is called properties in Notion. And then you just say the second one is actually the number 1. And then you just sort these in a way that it has basically the numbers, but ascending. This means now the number 1 is put first. Now here is where the stacking system comes into place. So when you actually schedule content and you do this like in a batching process and not like, oh yeah, I record one video and then in the next week I post this one video. But if you batch record, for example, I batch record like short form content and also batch record long form content. This means at a certain point in time I have multiple videos, which I have to somehow figure out in which order to post. For me, I have decided that the default is the chronological way. But I can undo this or kind of add another layer to this, and this is also possible in Notion. I can say, yes, the first priority is to have the publishing date ascending. So this is whenever I publish things, I just take the publishing date and put it into Notion. So this means now the items in Notion that are already published are in the right order, in the right chronological publishing order. And then you can add additionally an additional sort, which then sorts. So if is basically an if function. If it is not already sorted by the publishing date, then sorted by the chronological ID date. Because the ID is the timestamp, you can just chronologically sort the IDs, because the ID is basically something that goes up and up in every single number. And this is just genius, I think. It's not genius by me, but it's genius because of this ID. So what this now allows you to do is you have basically the posted items that are there. And because of this two-way sort, or this if function in the sort, what you now can do is you just randomly pick the next video. For example, you say, I made a review of the newest Galaxy phone that came out. And then you just take this, and whenever you publish it, it goes to the top of the list. And the rest of the items are basically the stack. The stack you can still post. And this is how I now also view all of the content I produce, whether this is a podcast, whether this is a video, whether this is a short form video, whether this is music, whether this is a short form music video, basically for YouTube Shorts or TikTok or Instagram Reels. You basically batch produce all the time. And this batch produce, so you make all these single files for these different platforms, or just not really platforms, because the platforms are just the end thing where you actually post the thing. But you much more make content for the individual categorizations you already made up. This can be a short form video that is short form that you can post every single day. There are lots of other properties you can attribute. And these are also the distinctions I used, and I came up with a distinction that allows me basically to sort every single file you could possibly create into the system and then post it to a certain platform. At least in my mind, it's a clear structure. I have explained it in other videos, so go watch them if you are interested in this system even more. And I also have videos where I actually show the things in Notion. But I wanted to take a more abstract approach and kind of not dive too deep into Notion, because then you would be fixated onto Notion, I guess. But to explain these three processes: the creation process, the actual file process, management and tracking, and then the distribution process. So now, what allows you Notion to do is to just randomly pick any attribute and attribute it to the file, and then sort all these things. So when it comes to music, for example, I have a database, not really when it comes to music, but I have a database with all the content. It's basically my content database, and I just have different views. And these different views just mean that there are different criteria, different selection criteria. This means I can say if the content form is long, if it's something that is an audio file, if it is something that has the state, so the property state, which I just call state, the current state of the file basically, is already recorded, then display these files. And then I have, for example, all these files, all the music pieces are already published to RouteNode, my music distribution service. This means I can now access all these things just by randomly picking a certain category. And you can also, if you don't have a certain category, you just create a new one. For example, there was a point in time where I didn't want to have the music, because in my categorization, the music was kind of the music videos that I didn't, not really music videos, but just me making random music, and it's a video file. But the problem was that it was not the same as speaking content. And in my mind, not in my mind, but by the categorization, it was still the same. It was long form video that is published to the long form video platforms, and it's content that is not completely made by myself, so it's not creative, but it's a cover, for example. And these things, I didn't have a distinction between a speaking video and a music video. Of course, you could argue it's still kind of the same thing. You record information with the phone or with a camera, and it's basically sound information and video information. But when it comes to actually distinguishing these two, I had to have a view where the music videos didn't appear, because I just wanted to tag all the things where I spoke. And therefore, I created a new property called content type, short T, and the two attributes there were either it's music or it's speaking content, so it's non-music. And now I have a new attribute, and now I can select from all of the content. I just can select, yeah, it's music. And now ideally, every single piece of content that is in there that is music, where I don't talk, but that just is music as the main form of content basically, would have this attribute. And then I can just output all the different files, also all the short form and long form. So you can just experiment with all of these things. And up to this point in time, I didn't have a database with all of the things. And this allowed me to say, okay, I have a process. I know what to do with these files. And even if I didn't figure out the scheduling to a certain point in time, I could still figure it out within Notion and just randomly, oh yeah, this is number 1, this is number 2, or just randomly publish things, and then I would automatically have an order. The thing is that you can track all the things also you publish. So now let's move into the distribution part. When it comes to distributing long-form video, you actually currently have 3 major platforms. It's called YouTube, it's called Instagram TV, and it's also called Facebook Watch. These are the main platforms for long-form video. What is long-form video? By my definition, something that is over 1 minute. And also by the definition of all of these platforms, this is why my definition, at least for me, makes so much sense, because it's based on the definitions of these platforms. So short form for many of these platforms is Reels. And the Reel on Instagram, on Facebook, and also on YouTube, and also on TikTok is 0 to 60 seconds. If it's 61 seconds, on TikTok you can still publish the video, but then it's kind of longer form content, and TikTok is kind of the exception, because TikTok was a short form platform only, and all these other platforms now added, basically they had long form content in the beginning, and then they added the short form feature, and now they're operating 2 separate platforms, kind of. If you think about Instagram Reels, this is kind of a separate thing. I mean, there are still the normal IGTV videos, which are kind of combined into multiple video, not multiple, but they are combined into one video platform as of currently, and this will still be happening for quite some time, I guess. So now, the thing I wanted to say is this. The actual this was just a German word, came through. The distinction is actually this. I basically took the criteria of these single platforms and made these distinctions. And these distinctions, of course, they are now for video content, for content that has a certain time. When it comes to a blog post doesn't really have a certain time apart from the reading time that is usually just an average of the average reading time. And so what I'm saying is that I based my criteria on these different platforms, and this is also why it kind of works so well, at least up to this point in time. Maybe they change it, but in the beginning, for example, Instagram Reels was only 1 to 30 seconds, and this kind of made it more difficult, because then these Reels platforms or the short form video platforms were not identical when it comes to content length. So now we already kind of not discovered, but we covered the video, the long form video. The short form video is basically the same, added TikTok. There are also 2 other platforms which could be regarded as short content platforms, video platforms, which are Byte and Thriller. There are also multiple other ones, but these are like the main ones. When it comes to Byte only allows up to 15 seconds, and Thriller also allows to 60 seconds, but there is, at least in my experience, I mean, you still reach an additional audience. And I posted a few videos where I just made random jokes. And I posted a few videos on basically Instagram, as well as on TikTok, as well as on YouTube. And Thriller got a few views. On Byte I also got a few views, but not that much, I guess. But it also depends on the algorithm and on what time you post. So this is not a scientific experiment. Rather, I decided it wasn't worth the additional amount of time. So my plan is still to post to all of these platforms. There is currently still a problem with Instagram and Facebook. Why? Because from the moment on you post these things, it doesn't really make sense to post them again, because people already saw them, and also just, you only have one publishing date. It's like one file, one publishing date, and this simplifies so much. And if I now go to Instagram at this point in time, in the US and in India, it's already possible at this point in time. But what now happens is, because Instagram and Facebook are one company, or are owned by Meta now, here's the thing that happens. In the future, there will also be Facebook Reels. There are already Facebook Reels, and you already can upload content to Facebook Reels. But the problem is that there is the synchronization missing between those 2. If you, for example, publish to Instagram TV, you can also simultaneously publish to Facebook Watch. So you have both platforms, and you access them by publishing to Instagram. With short form content, this is not really there. So there is the feature in the countries where it's already available that you can publish Reels to Instagram. And if you publish these Reels to Instagram, there is the option to automatically share them to Facebook, which is not in my country already. This means now, if I publish like the first 50 short form video pieces to Instagram, and then additionally, and then in the future, Facebook adds these, then I don't have this connection. And therefore, it kind of rigs my system, because I would have to repost them on Facebook, then I would have a different publishing date, and this is just too complicated as of a process, because I mean, I spend, for example, you spend hours downloading, for example, files and uploading files, or publishing files, or scheduling files. If you have like hundreds and hundreds of video files, then it doesn't really make sense to make exceptions, because every single exception hurts the process. And the more this batching process or a single process is streamlined, and the more it is identical at every single point in time, the more you can repeat it without additionally thinking about it and without additional information. So now, as a final resolution, we covered all of these different things. I didn't cover podcast distribution and also distribution of blogs and things like these, but I wanted to focus mainly on the content tracking in Notion, which I did, and I hope I could kind of help you. Now, here's again the final resolution. You record things, and ideally in a lean production setup, so something that is as simple as possible to allow for creativity, because if you don't have a framework, everything is possible at any given point in time. You could record videos in Alaska, for example. I right now could travel to Alaska and make a video about Alaska. This would be nice, and I also probably would enjoy it. But at the same time, I could produce multiple videos in the same time here, and for less amount of money, or for less money. I could produce them here. So, of course, not the same type of content, but that's where you have to define your framework. Of course, I can do these things in the future, but it's like with everything else. If things are not constrained, then it's really hard to think what you actually are going to do. That's the reason why going to school for many is just the standard, because you have to do it. And then after it, you have to figure out what you actually want to do. And this is a much harder question, because it's not something that's already given. It's not in the framework in which you have to be creative. So the framework for me is this process, and this has multiple sub-frameworks, you could say, but let's just collect all the thoughts together again. We have the recording process. The result of the recording or writing process or the creation process is that you have a single file, which you then can put into Notion, into your database, into your file management database. Within this database, you now attach different attributes. For example, the publishing date, for example, whether this is something that it can already be timed. An example again, it doesn't really make sense to just randomly post on Instagram due to the negative consequences of Instagram influencing your dopamine cycles, for example, and also just randomly distracting from everyday work in life. So therefore, what makes sense is to also schedule these. So it makes sense to select a few pictures you already made and that already then have a single ID. With my pictures, for example, I don't have the single ID. It's only for the video files, because I cannot rename all the files. That these are hundreds of thousands of files, probably. Not hundreds of thousands, but maybe thousands of files. So now you are in Notion, you attribute everything. For example, if you upload music, then if you tick the certain genres when uploading them, then you just also make a genre in Notion, because otherwise you don't have them tracked. And what happens now if you get an email, oh yeah, this is the wrong genre, and then you don't know which file it was and which genre, because it's just also many and you cannot remember these things. So here's another thought. If you have, this is basically another principle behind all of this. If you don't set up a system to make it all work, you have to figure it out every single time again and again. And also, just imagine you are not here anymore. Could someone else actually just get into this system and use the system in order to just continue with the things you did? I mean, this is also company structure and things like these, but well, now we have covered the things in Notion. It's basically the tracking. It's the tracking of the files, but also of the other things. Also, it's the tracking for me on which platforms I have published the content. So whether a video already is on YouTube or not, or on a copy platform, I have this distinction that there are native platforms. When it comes to long-form video, my native platform is YouTube. When it comes to short-form content, my native platform is currently TikTok. So this means the publishing date of the original file is on short files on TikTok, and on long files, on long video files on YouTube. So this is then the publishing date. And if I now copy-paste them to other platforms, I would have to additionally either track the publishing dates and then also synchronize the schedules somehow, which is something entirely else in terms of managing multiple hundred video files on multiple platforms. But if you have a native platform, you just track the original date, the native date, and the other ones are just random, basically. You just make sure you have the same chronological order, and this is also kind of when you then can search through the videos, because you have the same chronological order on the native platform as well as in Notion. And so here is the distinction. You have the native platform, and the native platform for audio files, for example, that are music, is a route node for me, so it is my distribution service. The native platform for long-form video content is YouTube, and for all these other platforms also, there are different pieces of types of content you actually can have. And then if you copy the same content to another platform, it's a copy platform. So when it comes to short-form video content, for example, the native platform is TikTok for me still. And then if I post the video to YouTube, then I just have in the copy platform property, I just add YouTube. So basically, that's how I also track what is posted where, because otherwise you would have to look up these things again and again and again. But if you have a single database in which basically all the information is stored, then it's just becomes very easy. Also, Notion has an app. So basically, if you want to add information or if you want to post from the Instagram app, then you can just go into Notion, copy paste the text you already wrote and the hashtags, and you don't have to write it on your phone, and then you just post it on Instagram. So this was already the distributions, the middle side, and the distribution side is something we already covered. This was a final closure moment, I guess, and I hope you could take away something from this long video.